So we've covered compliance, we've covered governance. Now let's cover risk management. The trifecta, if you will, of starting a great cybersecurity strategy for an organization. So risk management essentially is the process of identifying, evaluating, and controlling threats, including all phases of risk context or frame, okay, from risk assessment, risk treatment, risk monitoring, okay? And in the previous section, we talked a little bit about risk treatment, but we'll go through that and I'll reiterate that idea. So, risk management brings in a risk management framework, a structured framework that helps us to do this, right? Helps us analyze risk as it pertains to data, as it pertains to physical loss, logical loss, whatever the case may be. So comprehensive risk management, in this section, we are going to explore the essential steps of risk management. Essentially, that's what I already said, I know. So risk is a measure of the extent to which an entity is threatened by a potential circumstance. Again, we've talked a little bit about risk as it pertains to threats. Right? What's the risk of this threat? What's the risk of that? Where that came from was through government's compliance and risk management. We identified our level of risk. Okay? So risk in cybersecurity encompasses a wide range of factors that could negatively impact an organization. This can be physical loss through a natural disaster, right? Logical loss through a hack, etc. In 2021, Colonial Pipeline experienced a ransomware attack. It highlighted the significant risk posed in cyber threats as it pertains to infrastructure sectors. So what do? They do gas on the East Coast. They got attacked. Their whole operation shut down. They were losing $5 million a day in revenue. They ended up paying the ransom. Now, even if this company had great ability to restore, they had done what we'll talk about in the next section. They had plans in place for recovery, for reinstatement of data, all that good stuff. It may have been a longer process than the money they paid when you look at how long it would take them to restore versus paying the ransom. Okay? Now I'm not saying that's a reason to pay a ransom. I don't think anybody should pay a ransom. Okay, but sometimes you've done everything you can do and you still get hit. That makes sense, right? So information security risk is that potential or adverse impact on an organization's operation. Again, bringing back mission, functions, image, reputation, all of it as it pertains to digital assets. So remember, take notes, folks. So Risk Register, this is a tool used to document risks. So all of the risks tend to be done in an Excel spreadsheet if you're not using a software tool to do this, okay? They're assessed, measured. We talk about mitigation in there. Maybe we don't mitigate depending on the risk, depending on the data classification, etc., right? It is essential for tracking all these things and knowing that we've uncovered the majority of risk to the organization, not to mention having a historical record that we can look at as things change and as a means of auditing our strategy. Okay? So again, it is a living document. It's ongoing. It's constantly changing. We put in a new system. We need to run this whole process for the data on the system itself, the operators, you name it. So it is the process of identifying and analyzing risk to organizational operations. That's risk assessment. Okay? It's missions, etc. Did we just do that? Let's go back and look. Does that slide in there twice? No. Okay, we just talked about it's late in the day, folks. I don't know what to tell you. So 2 primary methods are used for risk assessment, qualitative and quantitative. So qualitative, now I remember quantitative by numbers. That's how I remember it. Qualitative, I think of quality. Okay? So qualitative is a method for risk analysis that is based on the assign of a descriptor such as low, medium, and high. Haven't we seen this before in data classification? So we can leverage those two things, classifying the data and then assessing it from a qualitative standpoint. Okay? Organizations use this approach during COVID-19 pandemic to categorize risks related to remote work and personal device usage. You know, we sent everybody home. We couldn't send everybody home with a laptop that directed everything right to our network through secure VPN, although everybody better have used a VPN. Quantitative, on the other hand, is a method for risk analysis where numerical values are assigned to both the impact and the likelihood, creating an overall score, okay, as it pertains to a specific risk. So example here, method is often used in financial institutions to estimate potential losses from cyber attacks and adjust cybersecurity investments. Is this going to take down the company? If it does, what's the loss? I mean, just right now, just go out to the news, look at the billions of, look at CrowdStrike, look at the billions that was lost. How many of those organizations really had accurate, quantitative or qualitative analysis as to the risk to their business, right? If systems were down. Risk tolerance, that's the level that an entity is willing to assume in order to achieve a potential desired result. So, if we have a ton of confidential data and a ton of clients, our risk tolerance isn't going to be as much as, say, a small business with 100 clients who doesn't keep any PII, right? So in addition to risk tolerance, we sometimes call this their risk threshold, risk appetite, or acceptable risk, okay? So it does help organizations determine which risks are acceptable and which ones aren't. Risk communication, of course, becomes important, and this is where the risk register pays in that if we're documenting in the risk register, it's a means of communicating. A means, not the only means, because we have to communicate risk out. And one way we do that is through policies and procedures. We're communicating through those policies and procedures as to this is high risk, this is why the procedure is what it is, because loss of this data is much higher impact than loss of data over in the other data center, for example. Okay? So risk communication ensures that finding of risk assessments is communicated with the stakeholders, with administration, leadership, whatever it is. And of course, everything has to align back to create culture that we want, support our mission, support our vision, support our goals. Okay. One example here is a vulnerability called the Log4j vulnerability. I gave you a little information on it down here. Okay. Basically a vulnerability that needed to be patched. And so as organizations assessed the risk of this vulnerability, which was a big risk, organizations started communicating with one another across industries, even across competition, to say, look, this is a huge risk. We need to go ahead and, and take care of this risk by patching it, essentially, So risk mitigation, patch the risk. Risk treatment, on the other hand, after assessing the risks, organizations move to decide how they're going to handle the risk. And we'll look at different treatment levels through this series. All right. So risk mitigation is putting security controls in place to reduce the possible impact and or likelihood of a specific risk. Data being hacked. Following the Equifax data breach and learning what happened, the data breach, many organizations accelerated their patch management because that's how the breach happened, right? So other organizations learned from that mistake. Boy, I wish more organizations would learn from all these ransomware attacks, that's for sure. Risk avoidance, so determining that the impact and the likelihood of a specific risk is too great. Utilizing this software, God, it's so risky, we're not going to use it anymore, right? We're not going to do that. We're going to outsource programming because we don't have the staff internal to do that. We're going to, risk avoidance. By the way, we start getting into transference here, okay? Well, let's just leave it at that, and risk avoidance is just that. Let's just call it what it is, which is avoiding that risk, doing whatever we need to do to avoid that risk. So risk transference, which I just talked about, paying an external party to accept the financial impact of a given risk. So, this can be hiring a managed service provider to do cybersecurity for my organization. I'm transferring that risk. They're the specialist. They should know how to do it. I'm going to pay them. And thus, if something happens, it's their insurance that may end up covering it. Okay? Which gets us into something else as well. So, many businesses outsource their data storage. Why? Because if they do it internally, they have limited staff, limited cybersecurity tools, etc. Put that data in a data center where that organization has better tools, more people to manage and monitor my data. Risk acceptance, determining that the potential benefits to a business outweigh the possible risk. So we're going to accept the risk. Small businesses, which may not have the resources, right, to address these risks, might accept certain risks and the cost, because the cost of mitigation exceeds their budget. But in large organizations, that's going to be different, right? But remember, in small organizations, one cyber attack can take down their business completely. Whereas that's not the case with larger organizations necessarily. As with everything else, once we're done, mitigating the risk, classifying the risk, doing all that, we got to do that continuous monitoring and control and auditing of the process. So when we talk about risk monitoring and control, we're looking at the likelihood or the probability that a potential vulnerability may be exercised, right? So, of course, 0 days are tough because we don't know about them. We can't mitigate or monitor that risk. But if there's a patch, okay, like the log patch that I just showed you, well, now we suddenly go, okay, wait a minute. What's it going to take to patch our systems? Perhaps we need to shut down, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. to do proper patching and do it quickly to bring our systems back up online. Boom, we do that. The probability is the chances, that probability that vulnerability is going to be taken advantage of and thus impact our business in a negative way. Impact, well, I just said an impact our business in a negative way. The impact, the magnitude of harm that could be caused by a threat's exercise of a vulnerability. So, what's interesting is, how do you think Sony Pictures, classified their email system? And then how do you think before their hack, how do you think they classified it after, with all of those derogatory emails, right, that made people from the organization basically get fired, quit, shamed out of the organization, etc., with the stuff they were saying about actors and other things. And wow, who would have ever thought that those emails would come out, right? So as you're assessing risk, really think of the true and honest impact of confidential emails getting out to the public. So continuous improvement, that's that ongoing process of reviewing and enhancing. That's the auditing, that's the monitoring, that's the continuous control, that's educating on emerging threats and starting to proactively deal with those emerging threats. So adapting to new threats. That's it. We've got one more part left. In that part, we're going to take a look at some common frameworks, do a quick conclusion of this section. We'll see you then.